Well, Calhoun, welcome to Australian Musician, welcome to Melbourne.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here again.
Living Colour will be here in May doing a tour, but you're here a little bit earlier playing with Mike Stern at the Bird's Basement. When did you first hook up with Mike?
Wow, it's been a pretty long conversation over a few years, and finally he called me. We just talked about it for a little while, and next thing you know, he's calling me to do a Japanese tour with him, and it was amazing. So it just started, I would say within the last year, less than a year, we've been playing together a bit often.
The thing that strikes me about Living Colour is the amount of work that the members do with other projects. Very diverse, eclectic range. You all seem so still hungry to explore.
Well, when you pick up an instrument, Max Roach told me you're a student for life. So Living Colour lives by that rule. We like to branch out and try other things, but what's the most interesting experience about our side projects is what we bring back to the table. When it's time for Living Colour to tour and create new music, we have all of these other experiences we can bring to the table. So these side projects are sort of important for us as well, outside of our own energies needing to expand and do things that you can't do in Living Colour. I would say more importantly, we bring some really interesting things back to the mix, and it makes for a more prosperous, I think, spiritually invested Living Colour.
Yeah, you really get into the history of percussion. You made a trip to Africa, not only to check out the place, but to check out the history of the rhythms there. How did that affect you?
It affected me in a great way. What was important for me was knowing what I'm playing. And, you know, where there's the groove and funk and blues and rock and all of these titles, where do they come from? What do the rhythms mean? And in studying mostly in West Africa, in Mali, in Guinea, in Morocco, I was able to hook up with master drummers and learn more about what I'm playing and what the vibration creates, what kind of energy, what kind of a feel. So it completely changed my whole outlook on playing music overall. But it is really important for me to know this information, and it helps me to listen to sounds now more and listen to less quote-unquote styles of music. Studying in Africa helped me to understand how to relate rhythm with sound.
The guys at Mapex celebrated that journey by creating a drum for you, a snare, the Black Panther. What were the elements of that they put into it that had to be right for you to put your name to that?
Well, here's the thing. I had a snare drum I buried in my backyard for 4 years, a 1969 Ludwig snare drum. And it's just a metal drum. It's a classic one. It's on many classic recordings that we all know and love. And I left it in there for 4 years, 4 seasons. Took it out of the ground. It had a very interesting sort of a rustic look to it. I put some hardware on it and played it, and it sounded amazing. So I sent the drum to Mapex. Mapex thought, this is an amazing snare drum. How did you do this? How did you create this drum? And I mentioned that I buried it, and they weren't interested in burying any snare drums. But we decided to take this very interesting brass and not treat it as much as you would treat a normal brass snare drum. And then we made it thinner, 2.3 millimeters, and then I called it the Nomad snare drum, which is what I feel like I am in this business and researching music, etc. And there's a very interesting emblem on the drum, which is from the Dinka tribe in Africa, and it means the transformation. So the sign is on there because I felt like the sound is a transformation of ideas and my own career, playing jazz and rock and world music and so on. So it started with burying this 1960 shell into the ground.
Brazil was also a very influential country for you as well. What does travel in general do for you?
Outside of making me extremely happy, outside of educating me a great deal, it creates balance for me. I think it makes you humble, and growing up in a country like North America, it can be a pretty arrogant place where a lot of the government and the politics and the media gives you the impression that everything is there, and this is the place where everybody wants to go, and this is where everything happens. And traveling helps me to realize that there's a big world out there. It's not small, and there are a lot of people. Many of us are the same. Many of us come from different places and different things. But knowing more about the world helps me to know more about myself and how I want to be an artist. So Brazil was incredible. I was in the Amazon with the Forro Indians, studied maracatu drumming, play with some famous musicians in Brazil, but mostly infamous ones, because once again, I was trying to get to the root of music and rhythm. And Brazil was the place that took me in. And when you get around elders and they see you're from a country like North America and you go there and you say, I want to study, I'm going to spend the next 6 months here, a lot of walls come down. A lot of information comes to you that would have never come to you by doing a tour and going to a museum or just picking up a recording in a CD shop. Really being around the families, being around the musicians, being around eating the food, being out in the desert or being in the bush with these artists helps you to understand really what music means to us as human beings.
You're doing a jazz gig this week. You're coming back and doing a rock gig with Living Colour. In an interview once, I either read it or saw you talking about a great quote. You said a mistake in jazz might be a great idea in rock. Can you expand on that?
Well, jazz gets the sort of the PhD look at it and how playing things correctly and knowing chord melody and knowing how to solo and do scales. And rock and roll is this very kind of loose thing. Not that jazz isn't. I think they're very similar in a lot of ways. But when you mention the term playing jazz, sometimes you're in an ensemble, there are things that I think are a bit more rigid than playing rock and roll, in my opinion. So a wrong chord maybe or a different kind of a feel in jazz could feel like, oh, that's not within the alphabetic dialogue of jazz, whereas in rock and roll, no one's going to turn around and give a damn because they're just kind of putting out this kind of really interesting energy. So I was joking about it halfway, but I did also mean it. Both styles have certain kind of rules to it. I just think the jazz one has a bit more intellectualism to it, where people expect a certain kind of a language out of the drum set, out of the bass. Now, there's masters like Tony Williams and John Coltrane, in my opinion, and Herbie Hancock that broke those rules, which I think are great. But rock and roll doesn't really come with those sort of instructions and feelings. It really is about the lyric and what you're saying, how you're feeling, expressing yourself, which is what led to punk and heavy metal and other kinds of things. So it's a little less guardrails on the highway in that style.
It was great to see Living Colour release an EP last year, Who Shot You? And I believe there's an album on the way.
It's called Shade. It's coming out on, I feel embarrassed that I'm pausing there, but Megaforce Records, excuse me. I have a jazz record out too, so I almost said the jazz label, but it's coming out on Megaforce Records, and we're looking forward to coming down here. We'll play some of the older stuff, but we're looking forward to playing this new music in front of this lovely Australian audience who's been really supportive for us from day one, coming down here after the Stain tour. So yeah, you'll hear some great new music that'll be out shortly after we depart.
Would you say there is an overall theme lyrically to the new album?
Yes, Shade is a very interesting title because shade is something you get out of the sun for. There's the slang of shading someone, meaning you're kind of putting them out of the conversation. You're shading someone in the conversation, shading someone on stage in music. You're shading someone in your relationship. You're just kind of putting a bit of a dampener over it. So, yeah, although the record was mostly written in the last 3 years, ironically, much of what we're talking about deals with our new administration.
Which is very interesting.
I'm trying to be kind in this interview. Yes, it is very interesting.
How did the songs come together? Do you generally jam songs out?
There was a lot of jamming musically here, but lyrically was really more academic and sit down. I sat down with Corey a few times, Vernon, and sat down with Corey as well. We had some outside interest come in with some lyrical ideas, but I would say most of these songs on the new record stem from jams than written parts like the first few records did. This was really more of a jam, picking out grooves and recording sound checks and then piecing some bits together to make some new music.
Yeah. Just going back to the lyrical content, the great Australian band Midnight Oil, a very political band,
Love them.
are reforming and touring in America again. You guys have never been afraid to say what's on your mind. Musicians often cop a lot of flack about speaking out politically. People say, just play your music, we just want to hear your music. What's your feeling on musicians having a political voice?
I think it's great. You're political whether you keep your mouth shut or you open it. Art is one of the best, I feel, mediums for us to say what we feel and express ourselves. And people may not like it, but for my experience in this business, most people appreciate the speaking out. They're not, whether it's something I think powerful and tangible, like a Bob Marley record, like a Buffalo Soldiers kind of song, versus a Midnight Oil song. I think for me, it's kind of the same language. But we do have a responsibility. We are affected by things, and we should be who we are. Art means freedom to me. So freedom means to speak your mind. You may not like what someone's going to say, but they should have the opportunity to be able to express themselves. Maybe you'll get another take on it. Maybe you'll get insulted by it, what have you. But the opportunity should be there, absolutely. So I'm for artists, writers, painters, musicians speaking out. Absolutely, for me, it's of the utmost. Not that every song or every painting or every book has to do that, but yes, it's very important. And I think as an artist and a fan of music, you'd be surprised how your speaking out affects people in a positive way, or gets people to understand. All of the traveling that I've done in the last 15, 20 years, indigenous cultures mostly, I didn't speak the language. I didn't learn a word past hello, thank you, and goodbye. I never had a problem communicating with anyone because the music is the universal language. What we're playing, what we're discussing, it allows us to communicate. And if we keep that in mind, I think we'll be able to help solve some of the differences that we have as people.
I just want to talk a little bit about your gear
Sure.
that you're using. How different is your kit playing a jazz gig, like with Mike Stern, compared to playing with Living Colour?
Living Color has a lot more bells and whistles. I'm running MIDI from the rear of the kit. Vernon and Doug both like to have MIDI clocks going to their effects. So I have a timer that I run for each song so they can click their effects in, and the reverbs and delays work to the tempos of each song. I have a lot of samples to play, so I have a bit of a larger, I would say, office. If we look at like a desk in an office, the Living Color desk in office is pretty wide between the samples, playing my kit, triggering, sending out MIDI information, sending out clock, time, etc. So it's more almost digitally on the floor, academically based. Whereas when I'm playing jazz, it's just the kit. I get to play really more drums, I would say deeper, with jazz and cross stickings and doing certain things that not necessarily work in rock and roll all the time. But gear-wise, cymbals are lower, they're more ambient sounding, a little bit thinner. I'm playing really soft sometimes with Mike. He likes brushes, he likes something really soft. So yeah, I'm building my gear around more dynamic range than I would. Living Color kind of is a hamburger, from start to finish. So I know what I have to do. There's no surprises there. It's fully loud. There's not really soft moments. I need bigger drums, thicker heads. It's where the sounds can travel a bit more and be full and more supportive. I mean, you're playing rock and roll. You're playing a very thick, supportive role with the bass and the guitar. When you're playing jazz drums, you're keeping time, but you're also having more of an ambient range. So you can have smaller drums, higher pitches. You can tap things lightly, whereas with Living Color and playing rock and roll, I really have to drive a truck, so to speak, on stage. So that's the difference between the gear. It's just the rock and rolls, heavier cymbals, louder drums, bigger drums, and my technique changes absolutely for playing the rock and roll versus playing jazz.
And the association with Mapex, how far back does that go?
It's been almost 8, 9 years, maybe close to 10 now. Very happy with the gear. I wasn't expecting to become a Mapex endorsee, to be honest with you. It was a bit of a surprise when they approached me, and I checked the drums out, and they sound amazing. And the most important thing for me, honestly, is wherever I go, I'm touring, TV, festivals, the kits are always there. They're new, they're clean, they sound and look really great. And as a company, they're very supportive. This is very important for my kind of tour schedule.
And Sabian, you've been with them quite a while too?
Yes, I have. Sabian's great in many ways. One of them is, they allow me to create my own cymbals. This is a 19-inch, I call it a desert ride from playing with musicians in the desert. I wanted something really thin. It doesn't ever get loud. As soon as the harder you hit it, the more it tapers off. So the Sabian allows me to go up to the factory and experiment with things. But yeah, their AA cymbals and their stock cymbals also sound great. So with my kind of lifestyle of playing with African musicians, playing with Middle Eastern musicians, playing jazz, playing rock, funk, hip hop, drum and bass, R&B, blues, I can always get a nice range of cymbals that can work with different things that I'm doing. And Sabian allows me to arrange that.
Yeah. Okay, so you're back here in May with Living Colour. What can we expect on stage? How long will the show go for? Will you be covering a wide range of albums?
Yes, I would say academically we'll do an hour and a half show. I guess that's kind of the rule of the venues here. So yes, we'll do the records. We'll certainly drop some covers in, for sure, because we love doing covers. You know, we lost some really great musicians, and this just in the last 2 years. So you may hear some Bowie, it's possible. You know, you may hear some Velvet Underground. You know, there might be some other things we'll throw in there that could be interesting. But yeah, there'll be a little bit of the new record, maybe 3 or 4 songs from the new record, and definitely the past recordings.
Sounds like a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to it, actually.
Well, Calhoun, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back in Melbourne. Looking forward to seeing you all in May. Thank you.